cosmologies, they will certainly serve, but I want to suggest Li, or E, Confucian cosmology, Christianity, from being built, and is now trying to shut them down. May I begin? 감사합니다. Now, the topic that I'm speaking on tonight about the convergence of cosmos, earth, and human has ancient reverberations in traditions around the world, especially in the Confucian traditions of China, Korea, and Japan. But also, this sensibility is found in Hinduism in South Asia, in the idea of the Mahapurusha, the great person who in the Vedic hymn was sacrificed to create the whole world. In addition, this notion of native indigenous traditions around the world on every continent, that we are woven into the relationships of nature and the celestial systems as well. Very ancient, very modern. The evidence for humans, even in the world of Greece, where the Stoics understood this relationship of humans, earth, and the universe as part of an unfolding and dynamic process. We see this certainly in Western Christianity, in its medieval period, in its Renaissance period, and in the modern period. However, the challenge is this kind of sensibility of how we are connected to the larger world in the modern period has been broken and is even unraveling rapidly and relentlessly. But the recovery of this sensibility in a post-scientific world where a new ecology is suggesting this weaving of humans and nature in an interconnected whole, and the story of evolutionary history is also putting us back into this magnificent sense of our role in the universe. So cosmos, earth, and human has certainly a cosmology that has political implications, and in that sense, sometimes it can be limiting and restraining and hierarchical. But I want to suggest these cosmologies are also liberating through education, through self-cultivation, and so on. So when we're talking about this kind of cosmology, let us remember that we are recovering traditions in modernity to respond to some of the most pressing questions of our time, ecological and social and political. So we are engaged in what I would call a retrieval of traditions, like Confucianism and Christianity, but also a reevaluation of these traditions and a reconstruction of them for our times in the face of the modern industrial machine, which has left us in many ways alienated, exhausted, lonely, disaffected, and paralyzed as to our meaning and purpose and how we go forward. So let me begin then with a story. It was a hot summer day in Beijing in 2008. My husband and I made our way in and out of meetings with scholars and teachers, deans and directors. All of them professed interest in the environment, even as we were surrounded by the intense air pollution in Beijing. As we know, the Chinese are living in one of the most polluted countries on the planet. Rapid economic growth and unregulated development has caused an explosion of construction in cities and across the countryside. Migrant workers have steamed into the cities, providing cheap labor in the factory And the plan is for 250 million people to be moved into cities in China in the next few decades. Staggering. The largest migration in human history. Thousands of coal-fired plants have sprung up, spewing out particulates, even though the central government has tried to stop them from being built and is now trying to shut them down. The relentless search for energy resulted in the building of the Yangtze River Dam that took years to build, uprooted over 1 million people, and flooded ancient archaeological sites. The environmental problems surrounding it were such that even the World Bank withdrew funding. Other dams are causing similar problems across the world. In the midst of these pressing realities, some researchers at the Institute for World Religions at the Chinese Academy of Social Science were interested in environmental ethics from the 3 traditions of China: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Several professors there are aware that environmental attitudes and values will be developed primarily, although not exclusively, through their own Chinese tradition, not through Western religions or philosophy. And that is the invitation this evening. Through one's own traditions and culture, how will we meet the environmental challenges? At the end of the afternoon, as we were preparing to leave and face the searing heat outside, we checked our email. There was a message that we had hoped for but dared not assume that we would receive. It said, "Come to the Environmental Ministry's office tomorrow at 10:30. The Deputy Vice Minister Pan Yue will meet you then." We were elated at the opportunity to speak with him. The next morning, we were ushered into the gates of the ministry and up to the conference room. We were accompanied by 2 scholars of Taoism. We sat opposite one another like diplomats at a long negotiating table. We exchanged gifts. We gave Pan Yue a copy of the Confucianism and Ecology volume, while he gave us a book with his speeches that had been translated into English. We had been following Pan Yue's speeches for over a decade. Why? Because much to our surprise, this high-level minister was writing about the need for ecological culture in China based on Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist perspectives. So when we began to read Pan Yue's speeches, we were amazed. With great deliberation, he had gone back to read the classical Chinese texts and study their historical development. Indeed, he received a PhD in this area. There he discovered views of nature that were embedded in Chinese culture, understanding, and practice. As he described it, he was calling for the creation of an ecological culture and ecological civilization for China. He said, "We have environmental laws on the books in China, but we can't enforce them because we don't have an ecological culture." We responded, that is true in the United States as well. At times, we have had to sue our Environmental Protection Agency to enforce standards for clean water and air. This is because we have a weak ecological culture and strong lobbyists for industry in the US. His deep desire to plant the seeds of ecological transformation by means of culture was infectious. Indeed, what is striking about Pan Yue is that in many ways he is drawing on the model of the Confucian scholar official, or literati. These scholars studied the classics as a means of establishing humane government. Indeed, to become officials, they had to pass civil service examinations based on the classical Chinese texts. This was to ensure that they had understood the principles of just governance so as to be effective officials. The model of scholar official endured for over 1,500 years until the end of the Qing dynasty in 1911. While abuses of power clearly occurred, the ideal of the scholar official working for the common good was something that no doubt has inspired Pan Yue. This attention to the welfare of the whole may be one of the reasons why Chinese civilization endured for so many centuries. So what dimensions of Confucianism might still contribute to a sustainable future? What are the implications of this for Korea and Japan and other parts of the Confucian world? Let's take a step back. What is Confucianism? Confucianism has been conventionally described as a humanistic tradition, focusing on the roles and responsibilities of humans to family, to society, and government. Thus, Confucianism is identified primarily as an ethical or political system of thought with an anthropocentric or human-centered focus. However, upon further examination, this narrow perspective needs to be re-examined. Confucianism is not simply an ethical, political, or ideological system. Rather, it is a profound spiritual tradition in ways that are different from Western traditions. Moreover, Confucianism is being recognized for its affirmation of relationality, not only between and among humans, but also with humans, the natural world, and the cosmos itself. In this sense, it is described as an anthropocosmic tradition by the Confucian philosopher and Beijing University scholar Du Ming, who I understand will be giving a talk here as well in the fall. Confucianism is distinguished by its cosmological orientation, which connects the microcosm of the self to the macrocosm of the universe. A Confucian worldview might be described as a series of concentric circles, where the human is the center, not as an isolated individual, but is embedded in the rings of family, society, government, and nature. So all of these circles are contained within nature and the cosmos itself. Thus, the ultimate context for the human is the 10,000 things, nature in all its remarkable variety and abundance. To participate in these circles of connection, a person became grounded in communitarian ethics, nurtured in ritual relatedness, and transformed through cultivation, through self-cultivation. Du Ming sees Confucianism as the cultural DNA of Chinese society. He suggests that this is the reason for its survival down to the present, despite persecution under Mao. Confucianism lives on within the family and involves the mutual relationship of individuals to others. Family relations are primary, with respect for parents, grandparents, and other ancestors at the heart of human life. Filial piety is an indispensable part of the obligations of children towards those who have given them life, nurtured them in early years, and supported them in adulthood. This same sense of filiality is extended in the Confucian tradition to the cosmos and the earth as the great parents of all life. In some Confucian thinkers, this becomes a motivation for care for the community of life. The goal is for the individual to add to social harmony through appropriate relations and ritual practices. The Book of Ritual describes in great detail how these rituals should be carried out. In Confucianism, individual conflict is to be avoided and a communitarian ethics is to be honored. These complex social relations and emphasis on harmony are still evident in China as well as across East Asia. In Confucian cultures, traditionally, one was encouraged to pursue education for moral self-cultivation and contributing to the common good of society. Today, the value of education is still strong in East Asia, although more often for economic gain than for cultivation. Confucian relationality and nature embodied sustainability. From the classical texts to the later Neo-Confucian writings, there's a strong sense of nature as a relational whole in which human life and society flourishes. Indeed, Confucian thought recognizes that it is the rhythms of nature which sustain life in both its biological needs and socio-cultural expressions. For the Confucians, the biological dimensions of life are dependent on nature as a holistic, organic continuum. Everything in nature is interdependent and interrelated. Most importantly, for the Confucians, nature is seen as dynamic and transformational. These ideas are evident in the Book of Changes and are expressed in the 4 books, especially the Analects, Mencius, the Doctrine of the Mean, and the Great Learning. This comes to full flowering in the Neo-Confucian tradition of the Sung and Ming periods. Nature, in this context, has an internal unity, namely, it has a primary ontological source, or Tai Chi. It has patterned processes of transformation, yin and yang, and it is interrelated to the interaction of the 5 elements and the 10,000 things. Nature is dynamic and fluid with the movements of material force, or Gi, Qi. The morality of nature, affirming change. One of the most important things I'm going to say here tonight is that in the Confucian tradition, nature is moral. It's not just neutral. And that is quite different from much of our Western traditions. For the Confucians, humans are anthropocosmic beings, not anthropocentric individuals. The human is viewed as a microcosm in relation to the macrocosm of the universe. This is most succinctly expressed in the metaphor of the triad of cosmos and earth and humans. These relations were developed during the Han period, about 200 before the Common Era, 200 after the Common Era, with a complex synthesis of correlative correspondences, including the elements, directions, colors, seasons, and virtues. This need to consciously connect the patterns of nature with the rhythms of human society is very ancient in Chinese and East Asian culture as a whole, including Korea and Japan. It is the basis of the anthropocosmic worldview, where humans were seen as working together with cosmos and earth in correlative relationships to create harmonious societies. The mutually related resonances between self, society, and nature are constantly being described in the Confucian texts and are evident in art and architecture as well. For Confucians, nature is not only inherently valuable, it is morally good. Nature thus embodies the normative standard for all things. It was not judged from an anthropocentric perspective. There's not a fact-value divide in the Confucian worldview, for nature is seen as an intrinsic source of value. In particular, values lie in the ongoing transformation and productivity of nature. A term repeated frequently in Neo-Confucian sources is sheng sheng, which means life, life, reflecting the ever-renewing fecundity of life itself. In this sense, the dynamic transformation of life is seen as emerging in recurring cycles of growth, fruition, harvesting, and abundance. This reflects the natural processes of flourishing and decay in nature, human life, and society. In this context, the Confucians do not view hierarchy as leading inevitably to domination. Rather, they see that value rests in each thing, but in each thing not in each thing equally. Everything in nature and society has its appropriate role and place, and thus should be treated accordingly. The use of nature for human ends must recognize the intrinsic value of each element of nature, but in relation to the larger whole. Thus, there's a differentiated sense of appropriate roles for humans and all species. For Confucians, hierarchy is seen as a necessary way for each being to fulfill its function. In this context, then, no individual being has exclusive status in relation to nature. Rather, the processes of nature and its ongoing logic of transformation, or yin-yang, is the norm that takes priority for the common good of the whole society. Human society and government, the grounds for sustainability. Humans were mindful that nature was the basis of a stable society. and that without tending nature carefully, imbalance could occur. There are numerous passages in Mencius advocating humane government based on appropriate management of natural resources and family practices. Moreover, there are various passages in Confucian texts urging humans not to wantonly cut down trees or kill animals needlessly. However, the establishment of humane society, government, and culture inevitably results in the use of nature for housing, for production, and for governance. In this sense, Confucians might be seen as pragmatic social ecologists rather than deep ecologists who recognize the necessity of forming human institutions, both education and political, for a stable society. Nonetheless, it is clear that for Confucians, human cultural values and practices are grounded in nature and part of its structures, and that humans are dependent on its beneficence. In addition, the agricultural base of Confucian societies has always been recognized as essential to the political and social well-being of the country. Humans prosper by living within nature's boundaries and are refreshed by its beauty, restored by its seasons, and fulfilled by its rhythms. For Confucians, human flourishing is thus dependent on fostering nature in its variety and abundance. Going against nature's processes is self-destructive. Human moral growth means cultivating one's desires, not to interfere with nature, but to be in accord with the great Tao of nature. Thus, the human mind expands in relation to the mind of the way, or the mind of Tao. In short, for Confucians, harmony with nature is essential, and human self-realization is achieved in relation to and in harmony with nature. The great triad, namely cosmos, earth, and humans, signifies this understanding that humans can attain their full humanity only in relation to both cosmos and earth. This becomes a foundation for the cosmological ethical system of relationality. Now, to conclude this section of the Confucian aspects of this cosmology, of which, by the way, there are many conferences in China now on this notion that this cosmology will lead to an ecological culture and ecological civilization. The view that China needs to develop an ecological civilization is gaining traction on various levels, including the national and provincial governments. Former President Hu Jintao championed this idea in 2007, as did the Vice Minister for the Environment, Pan Yue. In November 2013, the new president, Xi Jinping, mentioned ecological civilization a dozen times in his speech at the National Party Congress in Beijing. The idea is now written into the constitution of the Communist Party in China. There are over 10,000 cities and 14 provinces committed to this perspective. Indeed, 1,000 cities and 14 provinces committed to this perspective. Indeed, this was evident in the Songshan Forum that I attended in Dongfeng, Hunan, in September 2012. The governor and vice governor of Hunan expressed a desire to make this a major policy for their administration, as Hunan has a population of over 94 million people. This is no small ambition, nor will it be easy to reach such a goal. However, the fact that Hunan's administrators have such stated policy aims to become an eco-province is noteworthy. Indeed, it is more than we have heard in the United States since the environmental movement began some 4 decades ago. What might we learn from the Chinese as they struggle to articulate and achieve this goal, drawing on their own revived Confucian tradition? So, to conclude this section, I'm not suggesting that Confucianism or any tradition is ideal or perfect, without fault and failing historically or at present. But I am suggesting that there are wisdom paths, wisdom traditions, Confucianism being one, that has something to say within modernity, within a sense of a communitarian ethics, within a sense of a dynamic, changing, vibrant universe, within a sense of humane government, All of these values and many more, including the value of self-cultivation and education, are things that we can bring forward not only in East Asia, but I would suggest in the world community as a whole. In other words, in short, the West, or the United States at present, could use some Confucianism, especially with regard to communitarian ethics, I would say, and a sense of a larger common good for the future of the planet. Let's go to the Christian side of this heaven, earth, human, cosmos, earth, human cosmology. I'm going to explore here the thought of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit, a scientist, who in fact spent several decades of his life doing research on human evolution in China. So Teilhard was one of the first to articulate the epic story of evolution in which humans arose. We have to remember in certain ways, this is a very new story of how we are part of a 14 billion year universe, because Darwin is not that old in human consciousness. So Teilhard was one of the first to put this together as a story of evolution. As a paleontologist, he understood the deep time of evolution and was able to bring together in a new synthesis his scientific understanding with his religious convictions. Here I want to highlight 4 aspects of Teilhard's ideas that are in Journey of the Universe. These ideas overlap with Confucian thought as well. The first of the themes that I want to highlight that are both Christian and Confucian are orienting to the universe. The first point here from Teilhard, but also in Confucianism, is this orienting to the universe, or cosmogenesis. Cosmogenesis, the ongoing change in evolution. So, Journey of the Universe draws on Teilhard's comprehensive vision of cosmogenesis, that we dwell in a vast and evolving universe. The fact that we are living not just in a cosmos, but a cosmogenesis, an unfolding universe, is one of Teilhard's central realizations. As he understood it, the idea of evolution requires a major change of consciousness to which we are awakening. He describes this as like becoming aware of a new dimension. He says, for our age to have become conscious of evolution means something very different from and much more than having discovered one further fact. However massive that fact may be, it means, as happens with a child when he or she acquires the sense of perspective, that we have come alive to a new dimension. This idea of evolution is not, as sometimes said, a mere hypothesis, but a condition of all experience. And I would suggest it's one of the great challenges for our modern mind and heart, our shin, to absorb what this means. How are we part of a changing universe? For Teilhard, what is crucial is that this evolving universe is not perceived as random or purposeless, like some modern science would suggest. Rather, it is organic and involves an unfolding process, which can be imaged like the tree of life, working towards a larger purpose. He writes, "The world is a building. The more one reflects with the help of all science and philosophy and religion can teach us, the more one comes to realize that the world should be likened not to a bundle of elements or artificially held together, but rather in some organic system animated by a broad movement of development, which is proper to itself. A process is at work in the universe which can best be described as the process of gestation and birth. We are not like cut flowers that make up a bouquet. We are like the leaves and buds of a great tree, on which everything appears at its proper time and place as required and determined by the good of the whole. Deep time, then, and vast space can be comprehended with the metaphor of that which is in a process of gestation and birth. Awakening to the reality of cosmogenesis will take humans decades, if not centuries. The universe is far greater in time and space than humans could have imagined, and we are birthed from this process. And that means that more stories will be told of this unfolding universe. This, then, is Teilhard's remarkable insight, that the increasing complexity and consciousness of the universe gave rise to the humans and awakens in us the depths of developmental time. We are part of an unfolding 14 billion year universe, immense journey. Our orientation to the universe is the foundation of who we are. We are not at the margins of this process by virtue of our unique consciousness, but intrinsic to it, central to it, arising from it, and responsible for its future flourishing. We are, as the Confucians say, the mind and heart of heaven and earth. We are the conscious awareness, the Shin of heaven and earth. Here, heaven indicates the cosmos, and earth refers to the fecund processes of nature. Journey of the Universe explores this idea of cosmogenesis further, inviting us to imagine how these vast processes arose from the initial flaring forth of some 14 billion years ago. It draws us into the almost miraculous rate of expansion of the early universe. Not too fast, not too slow. If it was faster or slower, nothing would have emerged. That is astonishing. This is an illustration that the conditions for life were so carefully enfolded into this process that one cannot but be filled with amazement. The age of the universe, its vast scale, and its rate of expansion were only discovered within the last several decades, especially due to the work of astrophysicists at Princeton and elsewhere. These discoveries are what Journey is bringing forth in a way that humans can hopefully comprehend and absorb, not simply as an abstraction or scientific fact, but as a lived reality, a lived cosmology. To see this as a story in which humans emerge is the intent of Journey. The universe is not simply background. The Earth is not a platform, but life is woven into Earth's processes. Thus, we are part of cosmogenesis, of this epic changing process in which we participate. Our role matters, and we are discovering ourselves anew in this epic context. Our individual and collective journeys are aligned with the journey of the universe. We are birthed into deep time and vast space. Our coming alive to these new dimensions of being human in an evolving universe is one of the great challenges of our time. Talked about orienting to the universe, to cosmogenesis, now grounding in the earth. And we're going to talk about the within of things, which I like to say in the Confucian worldview is chi, or gi, as you would say in Korean, matter, energy. So such a growing consciousness is connected to the understanding that we are part of a living universe. For Teilhard, this is what he would say the universe has a within. And Teilhard writes this. And when I'm saying a within, it means we have consciousness. Some would say we have a soul, we have a spirit. But this perspective is saying, as Chi would say, or Gi, this matter energy, that is true for all of life, for all living systems. And this is the Confucian Taoist worldview. So here's what Teilhard says. It is a fact beyond question that deep within ourselves we can discern an interior at the heart of things. And this glimpse is sufficient to force upon us the conviction that in one degree or another, this interior exists and has always existed in nature, since at one particular point in itself, the stuff of the universe has an inner face. We are forced to conclude that in its very structure, that is, in every region of space and time, it has this double aspect. In all things, there is a within coextensive with this without. In other words, matter is not dead. Matter is not senseless, something to be used and abused. There's an interior part of matter. This within of things, or subjectivity, is similar to what religious traditions refer to as a spirit within, or scientists speak of as energy and matter. The Confucians tell us that we are part of this dynamic universe permeated with a vital force. Qi is what awakens that power in nature, and we experience it in sunrise and sunset, in the beauty of oceans, lakes, rivers, the luminous quality of vegetative life, trees, plants, and flowers. Qi is cultivated across East Asia in exercises such as Tai Chi and Qigong. Acupuncture and traditional medicine in China and Korea and Japan is a method of increasing the flow of Qi for long-term health. This is being practiced in many parts of the world now. In the universe itself, this creativity, then, is what brought forth galaxies and stars and solar systems. In the living world, it is sentience that permeates all life forms, the single-celled creatures, from single-celled creatures to self-reflective humans. But how far back does that go? So when we were doing the part on the cell, we asked cell biologist Ursula Goodenough, what would you say about sentience down to the cell? And she says, absolutely, because there's discernment, the ability to say what is coming into the cell or not. So we can say all the way back to the smallest forms of life, there is differentiated sentience. Now, the third part here is participating in pattern, or self-organizing dynamics. Pattern, I'm using the Chinese word li, or yi in Korean. So you have pattern, yi, you've got qi, matter energy, or gi. These are two dynamic forces in all of thought in the Confucian tradition across East Asia. The creativity of the universe is differentiated. It's not just a smudge. It is pregnant with pattern. The Neo-Confucians call this the li within qi, the inner ordering pattern of things, which needs to be intuited, sensed, studied, and understood. This Chinese character for li refers to the pattern in jade. It's like form in matter. In traditional Chinese thought, Confucian thought, to perceive this patterning is both a spiritual act of cultivation and a mental act of a perception. Sensing the self-organizing dynamics of nature is resonating with it. Understanding it intellectually is the task of natural historians who catalog plants, animals, fish, shells, and rocks. In Korea, the great Neo-Confucian philosopher Yi Wang emphasized li, or yi, and yi emphasized qi, or gi. Many famous debates took place regarding the relationship of these two entities, and that was the focus of my work in Japan, this interaction of pattern and energy that swept across the East Asian world and had high-level thinking in China, Korea, and Japan. So Teilhard also had a sense of the creativity of matter itself as animated by a logos, an inner ordering pattern. This is how an acorn becomes an oak, a seed bursts forth into a rose. In Journey, this inner ordering dimension of matter is self-organizing dynamics. We describe how this gave life to the structures of the universe and then to life forms. Ilya Prigogine won a Nobel Prize for this notion of self-organizing dynamics in matter itself. like a whirlpool. We participate in these unfolding patterns of the universe because in some sense our challenge is how do we align ourselves with these self-organizing dynamics of evolution in the way that will benefit all of the life community. This makes this very practical. How can we, for example, construct our agricultural systems? How can we build our cities? How can we engineer transportation, build our buildings? How can we foster renewable energy? So the point here is how do we align ourselves with the ecological processes of nature to create flourishing civilizations in alignment with the ecological systems, not outside them. That means renewable energy. It means eco-cities. It means green buildings. So, the fourth and the final point here, so we've done orienting to the cosmos, grounding in the earth, participating in the transformative processes, the ecological processes, and now transforming in action. What Teilhard called hominization, or divinizing human efforts. I like to think of this as Ren, which is humaneness, benevolence, the character for love in Chinese. So to align ourselves with evolutionary processes suggests that we need to shift from our current destructive tendencies to ways of enhancing Earth processes. How to do this remains a challenge. We have created an environmental crisis of such proportions that humans are becoming paralyzed by the size and complexity of the problems. Can we find the perspective and energy to meet these challenges without losing hope? Teilhard's concern to activate human energy for creating the future was ever present in his thinking, especially in the face of the existentialist angst and post-war despair that gripped Europe after World War II. So what Teilhard was searching for, and I would suggest we are as well, is where do we find the sources for the zest for life in a period of existential angst and even despair? Where will we find these sources of renewing the life hope and the life force? Clearly, Teilhard could not have anticipated Earth's present population explosion to more than 7 billion people and accompanying environmental destruction that has occurred in the last 60 years. He had a more optimistic sense of progress and of the power of technology to assist humans in building the Earth. His optimism needs to be tempered by a new understanding of the limits of growth and of planetary boundaries. We can move forward with an ecological economics that recognizes Earth's limits. We can draw on indicators of human happiness that are measured by not just gross domestic progress, but rather gross national happiness indicators, as in Bhutan. This suggests that the quality of a person's life is not measured by material wealth alone. Yet Teilhard's love for the earth and his hope for the future are invaluable for inspiring humans to reshape our future. He encouraged humans not to become distorted, disgusted, or divided toward the world. Indeed, he maintained that his faith in the world was his dominant faith. He spoke of the need for the perspective of hominization, whereby human reflection and action complete the evolutionary process. For both Confucians and Teilhardians, humans can become co-creators with the unfolding powers of the universe. For Teilhard, this perspective is indispensable for seeing how we can relate to the meaning of human endeavors to evolution. He urges us to see ourselves as an invaluable part of evolution woven into its processes. Without this perspective, he feels it's impossible to answer the question of our life purpose, which is now the central question of the modern period. He writes, "Is life an open road or a blind alley? This question, barely formulated a few centuries ago, is today explicitly on the lips of mankind as a whole. As a result of a brief, violent moment of crisis in which it became conscious at once of its creative power and its critical facilities, humanity has quite legitimately become hard to move. No stimulus at the level of mere instinct or blind economic necessity will suffice for long to urge it into moving onward. Only a reason, and a valid and important reason, for loving life passionately will cause humans to advance further. But where are we to find the beginnings of such a justification of life? Only, it would seem, in the consideration of the intrinsic view of the human phenomena. Let me say this again. He was asking the questions we all ask, the meaning of life. And he was saying the modern condition has left us without clear answers for that big question. And he was saying, as we see ourselves, humans, as part of this huge process of evolution, we will regain our sense of meaning and purpose. So he says, humans have every right to be anxious about their fate as long as they feel themselves to be lost and lonely in the midst of the mass of creative things. But let them discover that their fate is bound up with the fate of nature itself, and immediately, joyously, they will begin again their forward march. For it will denote in them not a critical sense, but a sickness of spirit, if they were doubtful of the value and the hopes of the entire world. You see, this is what we are experiencing. Just in China, the students were saying the same thing. What does it mean? I doubt the future. I don't see where I fit in. I'm living on the edge of despair. This is what Teilhard was trying to address. I think I will conclude with what he is taking us toward, but I want to put back into our imaginations one of the richest images of how we belong to these processes, and that is the Confucian thinker from the Sung dynasty, Zhang, whose Western inscription said, "Heaven is my father, earth is my mother, and even such a small person as I have a place in their midst. All people are my kin, all animals and plants are my relatives, and I have a sense of belonging to them." This is what Teilhard was also trying to say. So we have it from the Confucian tradition, this sense of belonging to the heaven, earth, and human. And what Teilhard says, the human soul is inseparable in its birth and in its growth from the universe into which it is born. It is we, through our own activity, must industriously assemble the widely scattered elements. The labor of seaweed, as the substances disperse throughout the vast layers of the ocean. The industry of bees as they make honey from the juices scattered by so many flowers. So what he is inviting us into is what he calls the great work of our times. And it is this, that every person in the course of their life must construct, starting from the most natural zone of their own self, a work, an opus, into which something enters from all the elements of the earth. We make our own soul throughout all our earthly days, and at the same time, we collaborate in another work, in another opus, which infinitely transcends the perspective of our individual achievement, namely the completion of the world. The completion of the world then relies on each of our efforts. This is an ongoing process, an ongoing journey in which we contribute to the flourishing of our sacred earth community. That is the aim of Confucianism and the aim of Christian Teilhard worldview. May you find your contribution as well. My suggestion is they will certainly survive in a variety of ways, not necessarily institutional, ritualized Confucianism, but in a whole new variety of ways as Korean scholars, as Korean universities, and even as some Korean young people pick this up for new forms of Confucianism. And that is our challenge. What is new forms of Confucianism in Korea, even in China and in Japan? One woman wrote a book on Confucius in China. Her name's Yu Dan. She's not a scholar or a specialist, just the story of Confucius's life. 10 million copies were sold in a very short period of time. So this need for our roots, we have to find ways to water the roots of our traditions. I'm deeply grateful to all of you for what's happening at Kyung-hee University. Let's do this together for the future of East Asia and the world. Thank you very much.